I'm really interested in anything you want to tell us about your own experience with the new pathways concept, like relearning stuff, or specifically what it's like to from your experience, your perspective of being confronted with the fact that there are other ways of living, thinking, being like
I
a
like the word throughing. I think it is consistently descriptive for me, because throughing doesn't look the same for everybody.
yeah. Oh, and you'll have to speak a little louder because it wants
Oh,
to kind of get like when it starts to get whispery, Zoom wants to filter that out as side noise instead of
I
like
didn't realize I was being whispery.
featuring you.
I feel
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm really loud.
Yeah. Well,
Um, so that's,
not loud,
one
but
of,
yeah.
I know that's one of the things, right? Learning, it's okay to have a voice. Learning it's okay to speak up.
Yes. Yes.
Um, so that Zoom doesn't filter you out.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Yep.
I like the word throughing because it it states what you're doing and where you're headed. It is both current and it is future to me. It acknowledges that there is a past, but it kind of unifies all of those into a single purpose. And I like that. Um, I like that reminder. You can't. I used to have something in here that um, talked about throughing, but it's packed right now. But the to me, it feels like options. New pathways feel like options. Um,
New pathways feel like options.
yes. Um, I think back to when I was really just kind of before God kind of just shifted everything in my life like 20 years ago. And this idea of, kind of what your name means, right? Like this idea of when I looked at it, it's like, I didn't resonate with it because it's not what I believed about myself. It's not what I fed off of
You didn't
at
resonate
all
with what?
with my name meaning,
Which
um,
is
which is beloved. And so actually at the time I was listening to a song on a regular basis titled Unloved. It was the exact opposite, which is where I really started learning to look at what I call counterfeits or the opposite, right? Like, and so when I saw it kind of all laid out, it was shocking. It's like I have another option, right? Like this isn't what I actually have to embrace. Which on some level, right, was its own struggle because it felt fairy tale esque, like kind of Pollyanna to me.
oh, like not even
Um,
real.
right, like where truth didn't seem real, truth seemed like a joke. Truth, because it was so far from what I believed. Um, and so it has been a process of throughing. I didn't know that term before, but we kind of toss that around now a lot more. But
Hmm.
the there are several times, and every time I look at things when it comes to throughing, whether it's intentionally creating new pathways like in this journal, or whether it's you know looking at my name, or whether it's believing something about someone else that's a struggle. It's like I want to see you differently. Like this is a behavior, but this is who I believe you are.
Hmm.
Um, and all of it has to do with speaking truth in place of a lie. All of it has to do with embracing truth and thereby embracing beauty. Um, but we don't often think about when we are embracing and feeding a lie, we're doing the opposite of embracing beauty. There's just this resistance to beauty. Like, and I can recognize that looking back on my life, I was resistant to things of beauty. I would still get caught up in awe and wonder at an amazing sky or a rusted bolt, because found objects. Things like that. Like I couldn't get away from the art side of me
Yeah.
at all. As a matter of fact, that's the only way I think God kept me connected to him, was relating to him as creator, creating something. Um, I think that's the only way I really kept connected to believing in who he was. And for whatever reason, that's what it was. But that throughing is this all these choices, all these choices of trying things that seem ridiculous, that seem like fake. Um, I had so many judgments against these things because in that you have to look at your own pain, right? You have to look at things that aren't beautiful.
Mm.
And I think as artists, we naturally want to see what's beautiful. But when we look at the things that aren't, um, there are things that we have to confront to get through. And there comes a place where having to see that throughing is beautiful,
Yeah.
and it makes you believe something different. I think it made me believe something different about God.
Mm.
Instead of looking at him as causing pain, seeing him as helping you throughing to get to a place of beauty in spite of pain.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, I mean, that has really shifted so much. It makes everything about it more approachable.
Wow.
Um,
How do you discern when to when you're learning to trust? The very definition of learning to trust is that you have had good reason not to trust in the past.
mhm,
So like you're learning to trust, which means we don't trust fully yet. That's part of the process, part of throughing.
mhm.
How do you discern when to step forward into something that might feel scary? How do you know what's the right thing to do, like in that context? Not right or wrong as in terms of like, is this a sin or not? More like who I don't fully feel like I trust this person or this activity or this whatever yet, but I feel like this is the right thing to do as part of my throughing versus um things that are probably gonna harm you more. Like the old ways or whatever. How do you discern that? Like, what does it feel like?
Truth. I think it looks like you don't actually know when you're doing it sometimes. Sometimes you don't know.
Okay,
Um, and I think that's where community, even if there's one person that you trust,
right,
even a little bit. I'm not saying that you trust them wholeheartedly, but
right.
they've shown you their character. If you have any sort of relationship with them, um, it's going to require vulnerability to say, "Hey, this is where I'm at, and and I'm just trying to discern. Will you pray with me, or do you have any experience in this?" Um, and really, but it is risky.
Yep.
But the thing is, right, if you really want through, you are going to have to risk. And
Mm,
it's going to feel like risk after risk after risk. And that's part of where I think courage, like I think think it's Joshua 1:9, I mean, there's several times where it says be strong and courageous, right?
yeah.
But Joshua 1:9, I think, is the one that talks about bringing you into a land, that was promised. And so I like that because to me it describes throughing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. You're not going to be courageous if there's not fear on some level, right?
Yeah.
But you go, okay, here's fear, now here's courage, and then we're going to get through. Right? It's this progressive thing.
Right.
And I think that's why I look at it a lot like a blank canvas. Right? When you approach a blank canvas, it can be scary, it can be intimidating,
It can.
right?
Mhm.
There's a certain amount of courage that artists have to do what they do.
Mhm.
Um, and and sometimes play can be terrifying at first, right? Like,
Yes. Yes.
um, and if you've ever watched kids for very long, you can tell which ones are afraid to enter into play.
Mm.
Um, and those who are very practiced at it, who created those pathways in their brain, and probably had someone helping them facilitate that.
Yeah. And not shaming
Um,
them for it.
correct. And so we are no different in that we need to be surrounded. We need to make sure we're surrounding ourselves with people who can help shape those things that we think, hey, I need this in my life.
Yeah.
If you find yourself surrounded by people who don't know how to play, you need to find some that who can,
Yeah.
right? In a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
If you find that you're surrounded by people who are just constantly stopped by fear, you need to find some more people.
Yep. Yep.
And that's not to say anything bad about them, but if that's where if you're wanting to head a different direction, you
Mm.
need to find people headed in that same direction. Um,
And you
yeah,
can still love those people, like say if they are
absolutely.
family members, you can still love them and have them in your life. But like what we say in God Loves Art is be yourself and let it mess with people. Like not in a hostile way, but be yourself. And it kind of
Right,
can rub off on the people around you, or at the very least, they notice that there's something new about you that is like, that's different. Then they can make of
right.
it what they will. You're not trying to change people. Just let it mess with them
No,
a little bit.
no. If we only have the power to really change us, control us on some level,
Right.
our behaviors, our choices,
Our own
right?
selves. Yeah. Yeah.
Then and do not expect. I mean, I don't think it's fair to expect that there will be no feedback coming your direction from people you've been around.
That's right.
There will be,
Yep.
and that's where that be yourself. Let it mess with people. They
Hmm.
are going to be messed with. People are used to feeling judged, and sometimes our actions towards a positive direction come across as judgment to people who really want to be doing the same thing.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh, like that little the what is that called? Like like to prick one's conscience or something like that, right?
mhm, mhm.
Or yeah, yeah, just kind of
Yeah,
like feel, and they can feel what they will, whether it's jealousy or condemnation, or like it's not coming from
or right,
but
shame.
yeah,
Shame
shame.
that, hey, I've tried that and I couldn't figure out how to do it.
Right.
And so, and as we've read, in some of Kurt Thompson's books, like shame looks for every opportunity,
Oh, it's sinister.
and it will put on the mask of any person around you,
Yes.
to try to convince you that that person's against you,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, when really it's shame,
Yeah.
trying to keep you from throughing on some level,
Yeah, and I
um,
think one of the most powerful phrases that I've come across just organically in conversation, in relationship, is there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. And it's like, yes, we've all had coping mechanisms that we've developed over the years due to a host of different things that were either unjust in our lives or just some kind of a trauma, some kind of an accident, some kind of a things that were maliciously done toward our direction, whatever. So like, because we have developed those coping mechanisms, and Lord knows that none of us are is without sin either, so like it's all intertwined. It's like, but the gist of it is like, in our core, um, there's a lot of people that have had these same coping mechanisms over time, you know, whether that's similar or different. It doesn't define us. It isn't our identity. The coping mechanisms that have been um developed in a time of desperation, they don't define us. And to just to like sit with that a little bit and just to say like that's not me. Those are behaviors that I've clung to. And it's not me. So um I think Graham Cook refers to like not calling people out, but calling people up. Like this is who you really are. Like you were saying before. Um, you know, and we can continue to do that even if we're triggered by somebody's behavior that reminds us of an actual horrifying event from childhood. We can we can know that like when we are thinking the best of people and still like not putting ourselves in constant harm's way, um yeah, this is a powerful thing to realize like my behaviors are
Yeah.
not me. There is hope.
And I think some of that, right? Some of that, as you're learning who is trustworthy, also there's that aspect that you can't get around in learning to trust yourself as well.
Yes.
Um, because discernment, right? If you're trying to hear God and really seeking, and making things, like in community, you have a group of people or even one other person that you can be like, this is kind of what I'm hearing.
Right.
Even in scripture, you can read that wrong, given your past, given your
Right.
background.
Yeah,
You
we
can
need
read that wrong. Who do you have that
yeah.
you can be like, this is how I'm hearing that? And to be free to turn the page and go, you know what, we're going to come back to this when I can hear it as truth and who I think God is and his character. Part
Mm-hmm.
of it for me was who I thought God was is not a pretty picture versus um it became a little easier for me to um look for him. But a lot of us don't grow up with that view of God.
Right.
And to look and go, okay, so that is something that I'm going to take note of
Yeah.
in my throughing. That is an area, a pathway, right, to then intentionally go towards.
Mm.
And instead of saying all these dehumanizing things about yourself,
Mm.
um, look up the opposite if you have to. If you don't automatically know, and sometimes the opposite will surprise you, look it up. Look up the antonym of words. Look up the definition of words, and it's like, oh, so if you don't want me to say this about myself, this is what you're saying about me. It
Mm.
is a total twist, and it is not easy to embrace.
Mm.
And really have to look at that, even if it comes up against everything you've believed about him or yourself.
You know, the Holy Spirit is referred to as the comforter as one of the words.
Mm.
Would you talk about that word for a little bit? The comforter?
I will say that is a journey I am still on. Like it talks about in scripture as far as like a this hidden picture of gathering
Mhm.
um and sheltering. Um I think that's a slower process for me, at least. Because that means you also have to let enough people in that can show you that aspect of himself. Usually, if there's a struggle in seeing God as comforter, there is a certain level of hurt with other people that you are going to have to take risk to let people in order um, in order for you to see aspects of God that you've probably wanted for a long time, but also pushed away.
I think I come from a background myself where, like you were just saying, pushing things away. We do that because we don't want to feel that vulnerability. We don't want to be hurt, and so like I pushed a lot of things away, like comfort, or like a lot of the attributes of God that he himself describes in the Bible. um I I wanted to protect myself from anything that I didn't want to be weak.
Mm.
And so yeah, I built up
Oh,
these huge
yeah,
impenetrable walls around me too. So like yeah, to learn to allow God to comfort me and things like that, it's really, really foreign and shocking to those of us who've been out in the world a long time with our fists up. It's a reality. And
yeah.
so, like those of us who have been not in those situations, who find it easy to be comforted and to embrace that word comfort, we
Well,
have
and
to
there's
just know it's not everybody's story.
it's not everyone's story. There is a, but also realizing if it's not your story, that God is gentle in how he disarms people. He doesn't just rip things out from under them. Um, and when you talk about comfort, you have to look at issues of hope. Um, because it is risky. It is risky to think, to put myself with a person, knowing we're people, we're going to unintentionally hurt each other. Um, but being in community where you can have those open conversations of, hey, this this thing bothered me or hurt, this is how this came across to me. What is your heart in it? Um, the hope of comfort is real risky, um, if you're not familiar with it. It can feel more like just setting yourself up for hurt. Um, and and so there is that fine balance, and I think it does have to be this process,
Mm.
but we have to be gentle with each other. Everybody's in their own process of throughing, and maybe their issue isn't comfort, but maybe it's something else.
Yeah.
And giving everyone kind of that grace to be in their process. um yeah, and there are going to be people, I think that's why you see these different clusters of people that maybe work more together, is, hey, they both have this similar thing that they're working through. These people have this similar thing, and there's an instant understanding that, on some level, I think thwarts the enemy's attempts at bringing more division.
Mm.
um do you know what I mean? Like, it's already hard enough, and sometimes still that way for people. um but I think realizing, if you're really asking God, send people around me and put me around people where you see fit to bring healing, because he knows,
Mhm.
God knows
Mhm.
each of your history, whether you've shared it or not, and how that plays out. He knows, there are, for example, I am not everyone's person. Just not. It's not, doesn't say anything bad about me, doesn't say anything bad about them. It is that there are things in my past that may negatively come across to them that won't be a place of healing for them, and likewise won't be a place of healing for me. Part of throughing is trusting where God is leading you, even if it means relationships are changing.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and I think that's important to remember, because even if it's the same person, the relationship can change. And it's not to say that you've outgrown a person, but it is to say that, as I'm learning, part of throughing and comfort is also recognizing you have needs, that those change over time too. When I talk about comfort, I'm not talking about ease. When I talk about, God kind of, I guess, orchestrating is the word, different relationships in different seasons.
Yes.
And for whatever his reasons,
Hmm.
because he knows more than we do. And I think there's a certain level of having to really embrace that he knows what's better for me than I do. Increasing, I think it was Jesse, you prayed a prayer one time, right? Like, I think a lot of artists in general care about personal growth as a general statement, um, at least on some level. And I think when you're talking about, I think there's one time we were in a meeting and you prayed, God, increase our trust more than our growth. And I was appalled, right? Like, like on some level, I mean, I knew it was truth and I knew it was what I wanted,
Yeah.
right? At the end of the day, I knew it was what was good for me. I think having to choose, okay, yes, I'm going to agree with that prayer, even though it terrifies me. And how dare you pray that for both of us? Sort of, those sort of things that rise
Yeah.
up in us sometimes.
Right.
To look at it and go, but I want to know how to trust. I can see where a lack of trust has affected relationships in my life. You know, move towards it. It doesn't have to be a big step. It could be silently agreeing with a prayer someone prayed that terrified you.
Mm.
Move in that direction. That's part of throughing, right? Moving in the direction. It doesn't have to look monumentous to anyone.
Right.
You know what it is for you. And that can mess with people. But over time, you will see a massive shift, and so will they. And it's going to look different, but all these small steps, right? Um, yeah.
Yeah, this is bringing to mind how specific God is in each one of us, with
Mm,
the different seasons we're in for the different people, because we don't struggle with the exact same things.
right.
And to just like, that's why grace is so important for each one of us and for the people in our lives too, because the reason that this is called FACET, it's in honor of the different facets that make up the whole person. There's a lot of different areas that I operate in my life. Some I pick up and put down over the years, and some are constant, and they're always shifting. These facets are made of who I am. It's my identity is Christ, but the facets are the things, the areas in which I live my life and I express myself and love people. And so those facets of me are unknown even to me, some of them, a lot of them. And so we can't know the facets, all of them, of another person either. Some are easy to spot. Some
Right.
are very, very internal. And so if we think we know what each other's struggling with, um, better think again. Like we
Right.
make guesses,
Right.
it's not really even helpful to speculate because that's another
No.
person's journey. And so if God allows us to walk side by side for a time, that's an enormous privilege, and something that I really appreciate, because people have walked with me in my life.
Yeah. Assumptions really halt communication,
Yeah.
right? And it's coming from our own grid. Sometimes the whole picture can feel overwhelming. And so helping someone embrace another facet of who Christ is, that's more approachable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, whether it's gentleness or working with them until they start to believe he could be gentle, or you know, facets of who Christ is, because it's still at the end of the day, right? You're not throughing without Christ. You're
Yeah.
just not.
Right.
But sometimes to get people to go through, you've got to walk them from facet to facet to facet.
Well said. In those site specific moments that God has orchestrated for you both.
Correct.
Mm.
So we just, God help make us available to those site specific moments.
Yeah.
You know,
Thank you, Amy, for this time that you've shared your story with us. And I really appreciate your insight. and I learn so much just from hanging out. So yeah, I love our friendship. I love what God is doing in both of us. And yeah, may God continue the good work that is already begun.